Hi, I'm Katie Brenzel, and I'm here today with my fellow reporter, Holden Warner, to talk about one of the most controversial city programs out there, known as the third-party transfer program. Holden, as you know, sort of broad strokes, this program involves owners who owe a certain amount of property taxes. City seizes those properties and then transfers those properties to both private developers and nonprofit developers, who then renovate those properties and turn them into affordable housing long term. It's very controversial because there's been arguments that it disproportionately affects communities of color. There have been instances where properties have been mistakenly included in the program, and as a result, the city is still kind of trying to figure out what to do with that program. The last round of transfers ending in 2018. With our story, I know we had really tried to dig into not just the property owner side, because that's something that's obviously and understandably been covered quite extensively, but we really wanted to dig into the developers who participate in the program. Can you talk a little bit about sort of the challenges that you encountered in trying to report that side of the story out?
Sure, it's a side of the story that hasn't really been told before, and it seems like a big part of that is that developers seemed hesitant to speak to us. There were only a few that we ended up having on the record, and I think a big reason for that is that the developers are kind of beholden to the city to some extent in this program, and so I don't think they want to ruffle any feathers. So a lot of developers were hesitant to talk about the program in the first place, and those that did largely talked in broad strokes. They gave, very broad answers as to the problems that they're encountering and the things that they want to see improved, but also saying a lot about the things that they like about the program and how they want to see the program continue.
I feel like even though, a lot of the conversations that we had, the developers were very careful about, what they said about the program, but I also feel like we did get a sense of, in some cases, why they participate in the first place. It is, at the end of the day, they're receiving a New York City asset free of charge, basically.
Right.
That said, it is still kind of a very complicated program. What was sort of the responses that you got in terms of why, what's in it for developers to participate?
Yeah, so a lot of the developers we spoke to, both on the record and on background, were very clear about how mission-centric it was. Really an opportunity for them to improve affordable housing stock in the city and improve the condition of these buildings that have fallen into some level of disrepair. That being said, they are rent-stabilized buildings, and when they're renovated, they remain that way. And so the profits that these developers make from these programs, from these properties in the program, are not very high. So it's still interesting to wonder what developers are getting out of it, out of the asset and out of the mission of improving affordable housing in the city.
Yeah, because it's definitely clearer for the nonprofits that are participating, sort of, it's part of their overall mission, but for a private developer, it's a little bit less obvious, I guess.
Right, yeah.
Was there anything about the reporting that particularly surprised you? I know for me, I was sort of surprised how difficult it was to figure out even just the basic mechanisms of this program, because there's so many different parties involved, and each of those parties seem to have a really good handle on their very specific part of the program, but when it goes beyond that, they really don't have a handle on sort of how things work. And I know that was something that we had to sort of work around and go from party to party to kind of piece together how this program worked. And one of the things that I thought was really surprising was, even though the city focuses on, or at least tries to focus on distressed properties as part of this program, it's not required that the properties that are part of the transfer program are distressed. So, it's very much based on, you owe property taxes, you owe outstanding fees to the city, you might end up as part of this program. Another thing that surprised me was that the city's targeting the block pickup requirement. So typically the city will, if there's a distressed property that's part of the transfer program, they will also pull in other properties on that block, any property on that block that also owes property taxes. So that's something that's been heavily criticized, and is also something that the Adams administration is considering changing if and when they bring this program back. But was there anything that kind of struck you as surprising through the reporting process?
Yeah, I think that was one part that surprised me. I mean, there's one developer we spoke to who, when we asked them about the block pickup rule, or whatever, the block pickup, they didn't really seem to even be aware of its existence, or at least didn't want to speak about its existence. So I thought that was strange and interesting. I also found it to be surprising how little data there is really surrounding this program. I mean, there's property records from the city everywhere, but when it actually comes to figuring out what properties have gone through this program and what has happened to those properties since, it really required a lot of digging, and it was not easily accessible information in the way that you would think a city program perhaps would have data available in some way readily accessible for the public. So.
Yeah, I think just looking forward, as of right now, it sounds like the administration's working with the city council to figure out how to revive this program, replace it. As we said before, the block pickup is definitely an area that they're looking at, but they're also looking at notification for especially the HDFC co-ops that are involved in this program. That's been a particular, as we found in our reporting, like an area of issue, because a lot of these boards don't necessarily communicate or have the resources to communicate with each of the members of the co-op. So definitely something we'll be watching out for. Stay tuned.